welcome to today's deep dive. I mean, we are starting with a pretty massive question today.
Mhm.
What if, what if the reason human existence is so incredibly painful isn't because some divine being is punishing you?
Right, which is what we usually assume.
Exactly. What if it's actually because your fundamental spiritual data is exactly 30% corrupted?
It completely upends that whole traditional view of like a malevolent creator just handing down tests from up above.
Yeah.
And to really match the scale of that shift, the visual backdrop for today's deep dive is starting as this pristine, mathematically perfect starry cosmos.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, but slowly as we talk, you are going to see it fade into this really dense, gritty, concrete cityscape because that visual contrast is it's basically at the heart of what we are unpacking today.
It's a really stark visual, and honestly, it fits the material perfectly.
Mhm.
We're diving into a deeply unconventional philosophical lecture that was delivered in Chunan, South Korea, back in May of 2026.
Yeah.
And the source material takes everything you might assume about human suffering, the nature of the cosmos, and even our own identities. And it just forces you to look at it through this highly mechanical, almost um, systemic lens. It asks that ultimate existential question. Why are we forced to suffer to learn?
And to even begin answering that, the speaker of this lecture requires us to totally dismantle our foundational understanding of, who actually built the reality we are sitting in right now.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, the lecture makes this rather jarring claim right out of the gate. It basically posits that God did not create the three-dimensional physical world we experience.
I want to stop there for a second because that claim alone is a massive departure from like almost all conventional theology.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if the divine didn't construct the physical universe, who or what is actually responsible for all this matter?
Right. So the source argues that God did create the grand universe, but solely as an automated system of pure energy. It was this completely flawless mechanism. But the physical, fluctuating, three-dimensional material world, so including our galaxies, our planet, our physical bodies, that was actually created by us.
But wait, to say we created the universe implies we were around before the physical universe even existed, right?
Yeah.
What exactly does the source claim we were before we were human?
The lecture uses this term Qianxin, which roughly translates to heavenly gods. So the framework suggests we were originally these pure, non-physical beings designed to operate within that flawless energy system of the grand universe.
Okay, so we were basically operators of the system.
Exactly. But then a degradation occurred. We became impure or clouded, specifically hitting a threshold of 30% impurity. And this triggers a central mechanism in the speaker's philosophy that they call the 3.7 law.
So the 3.7 law suggests a really specific ratio, 30% impure, 70% pure. Why is 30% the magic number here?
Because it acts as the tipping point for physical manifestation. In this cosmic framework, when the impurity of these heavenly gods reached exactly 30%, the density of that clouded energy could no longer be sustained in the pure grand universe.
Oh, wow, it was too heavy.
Right. It caused a massive automated variable in the natural energy. The mechanism here is almost like a phase change in physics.
Like how water changes depending on temperature.
Precisely. Think of how water vapor condenses into liquid and then freezes into solid ice when it gets cold enough. As our spiritual energy became clouded, it essentially froze or coagulated into the really dense, fluctuating material universe we see today.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because that reframes our entire existence.
It really does.
So if I'm understanding this, it's like God built the perfect operating system, but we essentially coded a buggy app, the 3D universe, just because our own internal data got corrupted by exactly 30%.
That captures the mechanics of it perfectly. Earth, and really the whole physical cosmos, is just the localized environment where that corrupted data can safely run without, contaminating the pure grand universe.
That is wild.
And the source takes it a step further regarding our current state. When a pure heavenly God degrades and solidifies into this material existence, they effectively become a ghost or an earthbound spirit.
Wait, a ghost?
Yeah, according to the source, we are currently those clouded spirits, just operating inside the very material reality that our own impurity manifested.
Wow. Okay, but if we accept the premise that we generated this physical reality through our own impurity, it forces a really uncomfortable question.
Which is,
Why does the physical experience have to hurt so much? I mean, if we inadvertently built this localized environment, why is pain such a central feature of it? Why not just program in the right answers from the start?
the speaker addresses the nature of pain directly, focusing specifically on the mechanics of learning. A really common frustration people have is, wishing they were just born with the right answers or that life had some easy, painless instruction manual.
Oh, definitely. Everyone wishes for that.
But the source argues that a painless existence would actually be fundamentally useless. If we operated flawlessly in a physical space without any friction at all, we would never understand the nature of the friction itself.
Oh, I see.
And more critically, we would never, ever investigate the root cause of our initial degradation.
Right, because there would be no contrast.
Mm.
If you're comfortable, you just don't ask questions.
Yeah.
You just exist in this state of blind compliance.
Exactly. The earthly experience is described as a highly calibrated, completely automated biofeedback loop.
Okay.
Pain is not a punitive measure handed down by an angry deity sitting on a cloud. It is a strictly mechanical response. It gets triggered automatically when a person operates out of alignment with natural laws.
It sounds a bit like touching a hot stove. The burn isn't the stove punishing you for being a bad person.
Right, doesn't have morals.
Exactly. The burn is just an automated physical response telling your brain that the tissue is being damaged, forcing you to pull your hand away.
Yes, that is a great analogy. The pain is a localized alert system. It's designed explicitly to force a pause. When you experience hardship, it is literally the system halting your momentum, forcing you to recognize your own clouded state.
So you can fix it.
Right, initiating the process of self-correction so you can ultimately return to being a pure Qian Sin.
So what does this all mean for you listening? When you look at it that way, it changes the entire emotional weight of having a bad day, or even like a really bad year.
It completely shifts the perspective.
For you listening, this framework suggests that when you face severe hardship, it isn't bad luck. It isn't a random curse. The system is just recognizing that your spiritual engine is misaligned, and the pain is a check engine light throwing on the brakes.
The difficulty acts as the literal catalyst for the correction. Without that friction, you would just remain stagnant at that 30% impurity forever.
But let's look at the reality of how people actually react to that friction. Because usually, when the system throws on the brakes, we don't just quietly sit down and reflect.
No, we definitely don't.
We fight it, we get angry, we blame other people, we just keep trying to force our way forward. So what does the source say happens when we just ignore the alert system?
Well, this is where the lecture introduces a highly specific and honestly quite provocative societal framework. When an individual persistently ignores the natural feedback loop, the system has to escalate the level of containment.
Escalating containment. What does that look like?
The source categorizes our major societal institutions into a three-tier system of correctional facilities, or essentially different levels of prisons.
Framing societal institutions as literal and figurative prisons is a pretty heavy concept. How does the first tier operate?
The first tier is the most literal interpretation, actual physical prisons. The speaker explains that people are drawn into the criminal justice system when they require a harsh, completely undeniable environment of physical containment to realize their misalignment.
So when society basically has to forcibly remove them.
Right. It is a brutal reality. In a physical prison, your freedom is entirely stripped away. The source notes that in those environments, if you so much as give the wrong look to someone stronger than you, the immediate physical consequence is violence.
Wow.
It is the ultimate forced containment for someone who completely failed to self-correct in open society.
That makes logical sense within the framework. I mean, it's a maximum physical containment. But the second tier the source outlines is where this philosophy becomes deeply controversial.
It does get intense here.
Yeah, the lecturer categorizes hospitals as medium prisons. And I really have to push back on this on behalf of anyone listening who might be dealing with a chronic illness or sitting by a loved one's hospital bed right now.
That is totally understandable.
Framing a hospital as a prison for spiritual correction just sounds incredibly callous. It skirts dangerously close to victim blaming someone for their own biology. You know? How does the speaker justify this?
It is a profoundly difficult concept to digest, and you are totally right to challenge the empathy of it. But the source attempts to remove the moral judgment from illness entirely, replacing it with the physics of momentum.
The physics of momentum.
Right. The argument isn't that a sick person is bad and being punished. The argument is that biological failure is the universe's mechanism for forced stillness.
Forced stillness, meaning your physical body failing is the containment cell itself.
Yes. When your actions, your stress, or your lifestyle are compounding your spiritual impurity and you refuse to slow down, the system halts you via your biology. Being bedridden is literally the universe grounding you.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
It is. But the idea is you are confined to a hospital, the medium prison, to study the internal mechanisms that led to your collapse. The disease is seen as the ultimate physical barrier to toxic forward momentum. It forces you to look inward because you literally can no longer move outward.
It's an aggressive reframing.
Yeah.
It basically strips away the randomness of illness and positions it as an extreme intervention. It's really hard to hear, but I do see the internal logic of the containment argument based on what we've discussed.
And it builds from there to the third tier.
Right, the third tier.
Mm-hmm.
If physical prisons are maximum containment and biological illness is medium containment, the source calls places of worship like churches and temples the lesser prisons.
Yes, lesser prisons or correctional facilities.
I struggle with this one even more. A place of worship is universally considered a sanctuary. It's where people go for spiritual liberation. Why on earth would the speaker classify a temple as a correctional facility?
It's because of the psychological mechanism of what actually happens in those spaces, at least according to the source. The speaker observes that people often go to a temple to bow to a stone statue, or they go to a church to beg, "Lord, give me this," or "Lord, fix my problem."
Right, asking for help.
But the lecture views this behavior as a clear indicator of deep spiritual suffering and captivity.
Captivity because they're essentially outsourcing their salvation.
Exactly the concept. The act of going there and acting pitifully, begging an external entity to solve an internal crisis, shows that the person hasn't found the right path yet. They are struggling.
So they are trapped.
They are trapped in a cycle of suffering, completely devoid of their own agency. The speaker argues that the goal of finding yourself on your knees in a church isn't to actually receive the miraculous intervention you're begging for.
Then what is the goal?
The goal is to eventually awaken to the tragic reality of why your life has degraded to the point that you are driven to beg a statue or a silent sky for relief. The captivity is the reliance on the external. It is a lesser prison because you can physically leave the building whenever you want. But spiritually, you are locked in a holding pattern of dependence.
Until you wake up.
Until you realize that you, as a corrupted Xian Sin, have to do the actual internal work to repair your own data.
That is a staggering analysis of organized religion. The source is essentially saying that whether you are trapped behind iron bars, trapped inside a failing immune system, or trapped in a pew waiting for a savior, you are in a state of cosmic containment.
That's the core argument.
Are we truly just waiting to be locked up in one of these ways before we actually look for answers?
Well, that resistance to learning brings us perfectly to the source's brutally honest assessment of human nature. The speaker observes that human beings simply do not study or investigate their own existence unless things are difficult.
Oh, definitely. We really don't. When the bank account is full and health is good, we just cruise on autopilot. We never stop and ask the universe, why am I so successful?
Right. The introspection only kicks in when the foundation starts to crack.
It's exactly.
The system recognizes this, and the speaker points out that the universe scales the level of required difficulty to match a person's specific constitution.
How does the universe determine the necessary level of friction for someone?
It depends on the density of the individual's stubbornness. Some people have a relatively light constitution. They encounter a minor setback, like a small disagreement at work, or a slight financial loss, and they immediately pause, analyze their contribution to the problem, and correct their course.
They feel the heat radiating from the stove and they pull their hand back before they even touch the metal.
But other individuals possess a much heavier, denser constitution. The warning signs do absolutely nothing. The minor burns do nothing. They will just continue to force their will upon the world until the system initiates a catastrophic halt.
They have to hit rock bottom.
The speaker uses a very specific Korean phrase here, jampa-jeoya. It translates roughly to falling completely flat on your face, like an utter collapse of your current trajectory. For the highly stubborn, this total collapse is the absolute prerequisite for learning.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. If you are analyzing your own hurdles, this concept completely changes the narrative of failure.
It reframes it entirely.
If you are having a terrible week or facing a massive, seemingly insurmountable roadblock right now, the source is essentially saying that this isn't the universe forgetting about you. It is a highly customized curriculum, specifically triggered by your own stubbornness.
Exactly.
The universe has calculated exactly how much pressure is required to crack your specific ego, and it is applying it.
And the paradox of this entire philosophy is that this harsh application of pressure is entirely born out of love, not hatred.
A very severe form of tough love, I mean.
It is severe, yeah. But the speaker is adamant that the grand universe operates without malice. It makes things difficult because awakening from that difficulty leads to an incredibly improved, restored life. The yank backward might dislocate your shoulder, but it stops you from stepping off the cliff.
Right. It is easy to sit behind a microphone, though, or stand at a podium, and philosophize that intense suffering is actually a cosmic hug.
Sure.
But I always question the lived experience behind these grand theories. Did the speaker of this lecture just meditate in a comfortable room and come up with this, or did they actually test this mechanism?
The lecture actually concludes with a deeply personal, really dramatic anecdote that serves as the foundation for everything we've discussed. The speaker did not arrive at this through passive meditation.
Okay, so what happened?
They arrived at it through a profound, almost violent existential rebellion. The speaker reveals that they used to harbor an intense, deep resentment toward God and the universe. They were experiencing a level of suffering so profound that they retreated deep into the mountains with the explicit intention of ending their own life.
Oh, wow. They had hit the Japajoya moment. They fell completely flat.
Yes, but instead of dying, they experienced the surge of absolute defiance. They turned their suffering into a weapon.
What did they do?
The speaker recounts standing in the wilderness and fiercely challenging the concepts of God and Buddha. They shouted into the void, demanding that if these divine forces existed, they needed to come down right then and there. They demanded to be punished.
Wait, so they essentially rage quit life, stormed into the woods to demand to speak to the manager of the universe.
That is basically exactly what happened. They applied maximum pressure to reality itself. The speaker freely admits to cursing at God, calling God a son of a bee, and fighting the natural environment tooth and nail. The mindset was, I am going to die anyway, so I am going to stress test this universe until it breaks or answers me.
That is a wild visual. It's like the ultimate application of the scientific method to existential despair.
Right. And according to the lecture, that unyielding defiance is exactly what cracked the code. Because they fought so fiercely and questioned the foundation of reality with every ounce of their being, they were able to uncover these natural laws.
So they actually came back with the ultimate philosophical framework just by fighting the system.
Yeah, and it leads to the final advice the speaker offers the audience. After recounting this rebellion, they basically say, don't fight God anymore.
Oh, because they already did it.
Exactly. The speaker is telling them, I already ran the stress test. I went into the mountains, I took the hits, I raged against the system, and I uncovered how this all works. Now you just need to listen and learn.
It's the equivalent of an explorer returning from a lethal environment, tossing a map on the table and saying, I found where all the traps are. Save yourself the agony.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at an incredibly cohesive philosophical arc.
We really are.
We started with the idea that 30% corrupted heavenly gods basically created a material universe, and we moved to viewing physical pain, hospitals, and even places of worship as classrooms of our own making.
Right.
It completely reframes our greatest suffering as a profound act of universal love designed to restore us.
It really does remove the chaos and replaces it with a very strict curriculum. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is heavy, challenging material, but it really has the power to alter how you perceive the friction in your own life.
Definitely.
And as we wrap up, we want to leave you, the learner, with one final thought to mull over as you navigate the days ahead. If this source is entirely right, and your current hardships are an automated curriculum perfectly designed to help you realize your original pure nature, what is the specific hidden lesson that your absolute biggest frustration is trying to teach you right this very second?